Welcome to Carlos Head Speaks, our podcast, and I am here with the fabulous, talented, my better half, and founder of Truth Is, LaDawn. Just a way that we share our story. She shares a lot of great tips, discoveries that she's made about herself, things that would help us to all figure out a better way to exist. And we were thinking the other day, and she's been talking to me for a good while about doing the Truth Is segment podcast. We got to do that. But I had a question before we got to that, and the question was, how do we, because we struggle in this as well from time to time, how do you have a difficult conversation and then get through that conversation unbroken? And I came up with 6 things that I believe are essential to, one, having the conversation, and 2, getting through the conversation so that at the end of the conversation, even if you don't agree, you can agree to disagree without being disagreeable, and you can still realize that you're working on the same page to get the same outcome, moving in the same direction. And these are just things that I believe we can grow at. We never get as well as we can get. We get good and we continue to grow and we continue to grow. And one of the things that I understand about having been in a relationship is that sometimes tough conversations can send you on a downward spiral that leads to all sorts of questioning about whether this is the right relationship, whether it's going to ever get better. Just a whole host of things starts to make you remember things that are not so pleasant. And tough conversations are just a part of relationships. They're going to happen. So I figure if they're going to happen, then the best thing you can do to ensure that they're not wedged between you guys is to kind of have some idea about what you can do to keep the train on track. And I just came up with six things that I believe would help to get the conversation back on track. And I'm going to let LaDawn say hello before we get into the 6 different things that I believe would help us all. Well, let's jump right in. How often do you have difficult conversations? We have them a good bit. Tough conversations. We're both very serious people. We're both very purposed and very determined. And sometimes we get tunnel. Sometimes we can only see things from our side. And it becomes difficult to have conversations that might elicit a conversation from the other that is not particularly a fun conversation, an easy conversation, a light conversation. And we've gotten better because we have some of the 6 tenets that I believe make for a great relationship. But the first thing I believe is essential to getting through any conversation, whether it's tough or a light conversation, and that's having an idea of where the conversation is going. Many times we jump into conversations, we jump into relationships. If we back all the way up, we jump into relationships and we don't come together with regards to where we're going. And in our conversations, it's just a trickle-down effect of the fact that we don't have any direction for where we're going in the relationship, that conversations that should be light conversations become tough conversations because there's no agreement about where we're going and how this conversation is playing along in terms of getting us there. So I believe the first thing that most couples can do is not address the conversation, because the conversation at this point is a conversation and you're going to have the conversation. But I believe it helps to peel back and figure out where we're going in our communication, not just this conversation, but where we're going, so that these aren't just routine occurrences that are happening quite too often in our relationship. But if we can figure out what's the destination of where we're going, then I believe it helps for us to begin to see things from the same perspective. I just believe that if you can get on the same page with where you're going, Source allows us to begin to see things to get us to that destination. It doesn't mean that you're going to see it the same way that your partner sees it, but it means that you begin to envision ways of getting there, which puts you on the same page, because it's like going to see a car that you're going to buy. In our case, it was a white Sonata. And the moment we made up our minds she made up her mind to buy the car, we started seeing that white Hyundai Sonata all over the place. I started seeing it when I wasn't with her. She was seeing it everywhere. And we began to talk about the experiences that we had that were different from one another of seeing that car. And I just believe that when you're on the same page and you're both looking at the same destination, that it helps you, and you're both going to stay focused on getting the Sonata, making the Sonata a reality. Any thoughts about the idea of being on the same page?
Yeah, I think if you're on the same page, that helps to have a better conversation. I agree with that.
Anything you'd like to add about how it's impacted our relationship, or how we've struggled or how we've managed to get better at it in any kind of way?
Well, I mean, I think it's an area that we're still growing in, because irrespective of us being two headstrong people or very opinionated people, even if we were not those things, we both have our individual thoughts. So just trying to get the other person to understand where you're coming from and being able to do that in a way that they hear you, so you can get to some agreement. I think that's a constant evolution in a relationship, and that comes from knowing your partner, knowing their temperament, and hoping that when you're choosing your words, you're choosing them in a way that allows you to really freely express what you want to express to your partner, but express it in a way that they can receive it, even if they don't agree with it. So.
I'll say this with full disclaimer. It's important that we have some direction in our own lives. One, before we get into a relationship, or at least soon after, because it's hard to ask your mate to follow you if you don't know where you're going. And this was one of the issues that kept us kind of at odds with one another. I was trying to figure out where I was going. She was a little bit more established, so she had some direction for where she was going. And I come along saying, hey, follow me, with not a whole lot of direction at the time. And so it made it hard, and it created difficult conversations just in itself. Notwithstanding the regular life conversations that are difficult, but when your desire is to help one person and they don't know exactly how you need them to help you, then it becomes difficult to have normal conversations. And we struggled in this area. We've gotten a lot better because I've obviously grown, creating direction that points us towards a direction or a destination that we agree upon. But in terms of dealing with tough conversations and getting through them unbroken, I think that another key is to use some emotional intelligence. Just imagine you walk up to your mate and say, hey, dummy, let's talk. I need to talk right let's talk. I want to talk to you right now, dummy. What do you think the response is going to be to that? What do you think the response is going to be if I just came up to LaDawn after, not considering what she was doing, but just, hey, dummy, I need to talk with you. Do you have a moment? I mean, it's a rhetorical question because obviously she's going to be turned off. And that may not be all I get, but she's certainly going to be turned off. And I think that when I say using emotional intelligence, I think I'm just saying understand. Now, it's tough if you're just entering into your relationship because you've not had a lot of time to learn your mate. But there are words that we know that we speak because we've done it repeatedly and have not changed the approach, and we still get the same outcome that we were getting in the beginning. And we know these words are going to be triggered. They're going to be like dummy words. But I think if we would begin to use more emotional intelligence and understand that I'm talking to a person that I'm expecting to respond to me in kind. I don't just want them to respond, but I want them to respond in kind. So then it probably helps if I speak words that are not going to come across as dummy. And I think if we do a better job at understanding our audience from that perspective, then I think it helps ease into the tough conversations. They may be tough irrespective, but if you can get past crocodile brain in the beginning, if you can put your mate at ease in the beginning, I just think it makes for, I think it at least increases the chances that you get to the end of the conversation unbroken. It's not a guarantee, but I think that it certainly helps. If I'm relaxed and I'm not tensed about what she's about to tell me, or she doesn't speak this word that automatically sends me into crazy Carlos world of defense and of, hold on, you live in your own home. So I'm saying, I just believe that if we would think about our mates, if we've been with them long enough to know that this word is going to turn them off, this word is going to put them in a mood, then why approach that way? Why approach that way?
Well, I agree, but I think emotional intelligence is really a difficult concept for most people to grasp. I think it's almost like HR. Everybody assumes that they can do HR because they just assume that it's hiring people and firing people when there's so many more elements and functions involved within the industry. Emotional intelligence is the same way. It's not just simply, I won't call my mate a dummy because I know that's going to elicit a certain response from her. So since that's something that you really have to be really in tune with who you are and attuned to the person that you're speaking with. So until you get to the level of really being able to communicate with emotional intelligence, I would say just start from a perspective of when you first start dating somebody, you're doing everything you can to be on your best behavior. You are paying just as close of attention to that person as you probably would at any other point in time in the relationship, because you want to make sure it's right. You want to make sure they're comfortable. You want to make sure you're presenting your best self. Now, I didn't say your fake self or your date self. I'm just saying you're very aware of who you are and how you are, and you're paying attention to them, and you're noticing everything. So when you're having a conversation, have a conversation that way as well, making sure that you are taking into account all the ways that you want your partner to feel when they walk away from that conversation. All the ways you would want to feel when you walk away from the conversation. Just simply employing those techniques at first, and bringing a little patience to the table, I think will help move the conversation along in a way that is productive. Yeah, it's that same old adage, it's not always what you say, but it's how you say it. And even if you've been in a relationship with somebody one day or 100 years, you know the proper way to present something. You know when you are speaking in a manner that is offensive, that would put the other person on the defensive, rather than speaking in a way that would elicit them wanting to be responsive to you. So, at the very least, just behave as you would when you first start dating, when you were paying attention to everything, and when you were really being considerate and thoughtful, and really wanting that other person to understand you, and you were really seeking to understand them.
So you think that's the key? That's key. Maintaining your early relationship perspective.
Well, I think that's key in all areas, from communication, the excitement and energy, maintaining, again, that's why I specified, because a lot of us, as they say, send our representatives to a relationship when we first start, rather than being who we authentically are. So if you can be who you authentically are, and you are courting someone and they dig you, continue to be that person, and however you showed up in the relationship, and that keeps as much of the relationship fresh as possible. So certainly in the communication realm.
Don't you think?
We're not trying to turn anybody off when we try to court them.
So don't you think, though, just over time, just naturally we get comfortable?
Yeah.
And then we develop habits, not to be disrespectful, but if you know these things turn your mate off, or if you know these are trigger words, then I believe that you don't necessarily have to jump through the same hoops that you jumped through in the beginning. I think it certainly helps because it keeps the relationship vibrant. But the reality is that we all get comfortable. That's one of the reasons I believe we settle into relationships, to find someone that we can be comfortable with. But that doesn't mean that you stop doing things, or you just disregard emotional intelligence because you feel like you're comfortable enough to just approach her any kind of way, or for her to approach you any kind of way. So what do you suggest for the couples that are just 7, 8, 10 years in and we're comfortable now, but I just want to be able to have the conversation with her, and her to use emotional intelligence, or him to use emotional intelligence, and understand that in my comfort it's not a disrespect or disregard for her consideration or his consideration.
So, let me be clear. I wasn't saying that couples should not employ emotional intelligence. I was saying that it's a difficult concept to grasp, and that's something I feel like you work your way up to with continued practice every time you have a conversation. So I just wanted to make that clear. But I would say use the same mind you use at work. So you can be on a job for 25 years, and you know your job inside out. You know your colleagues. You know everything, and you're very comfortable. You've grown in a rhythm in that job. But on now day, because you're going to go to work saying anything to your boss out of line, you're not going to do it. You're just not going to do it because you have something vested in that job, meaning that is your livelihood. That is the way that you take care of yourself. That's the way that you take care of your family. That's the way that you provide the lifestyle that you want. That is also an environment, if you were so desirous, that you know people are watching you constantly. And if you want to build good relationships with people, or even move up the ladder, you know that you have to represent yourself or present yourself in a certain way. So you should approach your relationship, your mate, with that same kind of reserve. You can go every day, you can participate in this relationship every day, and know what's coming. You know what your job is, you know what your job duties. Nobody has to tell you what to do when you get there. You get there and you do it. And you should grow comfortable in it, because the more comfortable you become, hopefully, the more efficient you are at your job. The more comfortable you become, hopefully, the more efficient that you and your partner work together. But you take that same level of reserve and respect. Just as you wouldn't say anything to your boss or wouldn't going to work just doing any old thing, you should view your partner that same way, because there's just as much to lose there as it is on your job. And I think everyone, even friendships, the romantic relationship is the relationship we take most for granted. We are more careful with not offending our friend or certain family members than we are with respect to offending our mate. So we should have that same kind of wherewithal or awareness about how we communicate. You don't want to offend your best friend, so you wouldn't do certain things. You should think the same thing about your mate. You know, if you grew up in a house where your mother would not tolerate bad language, you can be 52 and you can curse like a sailor every day. But when you're around your mother, you find a way to curb that. You don't say one curse word. So we know that you have the ability to do it. So you should make those same choices.
Well, I certainly agree that you should treat your relationship with love, care, because it is probably, undoubtedly, the most important relationship. It's certainly one of the longest relationships most of us will be in. One of the relationships we'll give more of ourselves than any other relationship. And I just think, having heard you say that, one of the things I think that came to me is, though you should do everything you can to treat your mate like you would your mother or your boss, I want you to understand early on, I don't know where you are in your relationships, but sometimes you will go to work with the best of intentions, the best of tonality, and your boss will misunderstand what you're saying. They will completely miss it. Doesn't mean that it happens all the time, but it does happen. So I'm just saying, create some grace in your relationship. Because you can talk like you talk to your boss, you can talk like you talk to your mother, you can treat it with care, and because you're dealing with another human that has their own emotions, that has their own days, that has their own challenges, sometimes your boss, your mate, is just gonna miss it, and you're gonna feel like you've used emotional intelligence. So that's the second key. Make sure that you just use some emotional intelligence, as LaDawn said. Treat it like you would treat your job. Don't start slacking off in year 5, year 7, because you've developed a comfort. It should, as she said, make you more efficient. But more efficient doesn't mean less productive. It just means that you're not having to use as much energy to get the same things done. And if you're not having to use the same energy and you're competing against the best of who you can become, then it just creates more opportunity for you to grow. So it all works together for our good. It all works together. If we work it, it'll work for us. So the third key is to have a solution in mind before you have the conversation. Many of us just come to conversations just purely emotional. We have no solution at all. And our mates are thinking that we're coming to the conversation because we're seeking a solution. And sometimes it's just to vent. Sometimes it's just to express, sometimes it's just to share. And I think in many cases when we're coming to tough conversations, it helps to stay on track if you understand what the solution or what the destination is.
So yeah, I think it's important to understand what the conversation is and what your mate needs. So that accountability or onus is on the person who's wanting to initiate the conversation. So if I come to you and I need you to just listen, I need to communicate that to you so you can just listen.
I agree.
If I need, help thinking through something, I communicate that to you so we'll know exactly how to move through this conversation. But to your point of being solutions oriented, if I come to you and I am in need of some assistance, guidance, direction, input of some sort, I think it is a good idea to at least have thought through what you're asking your mate to provide some input on. One, so you can communicate to them, hey, this is the problem that I'm having. This is where I am. This is what I've thought about. These are the options I'm kind of flirting with. So they'll at least know where you are, because sometimes when you are coming for input or guidance, that's kind of run completely over. They go from being a listening ear that you're hoping can share input and guidance with you on where you are, to they just running, steamrolling right over you and impressing upon you what they believe to be the case or what they believe to be the solution. And then now you have a whole nother discussion or argument that's coming out of that, because now you're trying to say, I wasn't asking for all that, and your way is not the only way, but I was just asking for your input. So again, it just depends on what the need of the person that's initiating the conversation is. They need to communicate that so you'll know what your role is as the listener, and then they need to communicate to you where they are and what they thought about, and exactly kind of what feedback, or what level at least of feedback that they're looking for from you. And I think that just kind of defines the role for everybody, and that minimizes the opportunity for confusion and misdirection in the conversation.
So do you think the stated purpose should be first and foremost in the conversation?
Yeah.
Hey, I'm coming because I just want you to listen, or I need advice, and that should be first. And
that should be first, and then on top of that, one of the things that I found to be very helpful, we haven't employed it as much as we should, because we both have a lot of thought, and we both are trying to, as the other person is talking, thinking of solutions, or thinking of what our response is going to be. And that's not always the best way to have a conversation, because you're then no longer an active listener, because you've gone somewhere else. Yes, the intended purpose should be stated up front. If it is a conversation that you guys have had before, the receiver, or both, but particularly the receiver, has to be open. If we start hearing something that was a conversation before, then we jump back to that conversation. We jump back to whatever tone that conversation was, whatever feelings, whatever emotions were attached to that. And we don't even hear what the mate is coming to say today. And you have to be careful, because although it may sound the same, and heck, in some cases it might end up being the same, who knows? But they might be coming with something new that they thought of, a new perspective, or new information that might change the trajectory of the conversation, might change the perspective of where you all were before. So you can't just shut down. So you have to be open. But what I was going to say is helpful is to build some boundaries. So when you come into your mate, and you know your mate, and you know your mate wants to jump in, you need to give them a pen and paper, and you start the conversation off and say, hey, I know you're solutions oriented, and I know you're always thinking, but I really need to get this out. If you could just give me a good 2 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever it is, whatever time frame you need to get it out. And if you have any questions or anything pops into your mind so you won't forget what you want to ask me, write it down so the conversation can keep flowing. Don't interrupt my thought. Write it down, because I might answer it as we're moving through the conversation, and you might not need to ask it, but in the event that I don't, you have it there, but you can continue to listen to me as I'm having a conversation. So,
yeah, I think those were excellent points. Some we can do better at, some we've gotten better at. I think, in hearing you say that, I think it's important also in terms of emotional intelligence, we use that word when we're initiating conversations, because, again, we have to remember that we're talking about humans, that on any given day is a human. And you see something that excites you, you're happy. You see something that scares you, maybe you're sad. And so my point in saying that, I believe that inasmuch as it's the receiver's responsibility to let the person that's sharing the information get through their conversation, I think it's also important that the speaker, if that person, that person is impatient, that person is just ready to jump in, don't take them on the scenic route. Emotional intelligence says, I've done this before. Taking them on the scenic route, I'm going to lose them. And then we're not going to get to our destination because they've checked out. And I believe in having systems that you can implement that stops you when you get off track. It just helps to get to that destination unbroken. So I just believe that in employing emotional intelligence, that it works both ways. If I know that I'm going to lose you, I'm not just for the sake of this exercise take you on that route that I know I'm going to lose you on, because it defeats the purpose.
Yeah, and that's why I said initially emotional intelligence is a difficult concept for people to master. It's not impossible, but It takes a lot of practice, and a part of being able to speak with emotional intelligence is having emotional maturity. And a part of that is,
I hope you heard that. Can you say that again?
a part of being able to apply emotional intelligence in the conversation is being emotionally mature. A lot of us just simply are not there. We're not. And yes, you need to know your audience. You need to know that you can't go on for 30 minutes before your mate checks out. But your mate also needs to build up that emotional maturity to know that my mate requires words of affirmation. My mate requires this amount of time to be able to express herself. And you have to grow into that. And so your excuse can't always be, well, baby, you know how what, because at any point in time when you felt you needed to make a point, irrespective of you having the patience to listen and wanting to use the excuse that you don't listen for a long time, you wanted your mate to listen to you for as long as it took. So that takes, again, practice and building your emotional maturity. So you have to come to the table understanding that growth will happen and growth is needed. And you have to be okay with that. You can't keep having conversations 10 years in a relationship the way you had them the first year.
And growth is uncomfortable, just the way that it is. You go to the gym and you want to grow your muscles. You've got to break the fiber in the muscles for them to grow. But I completely agree that you have to stay committed to growing. And I just believe that it helps if both of you all can meet each other in the middle. Because how it plays out in real life is much like a blame game. One person can blame you for not growing your maturity in listening longer. The other person can blame the other person for talking too long. And where do you get? So I just believe that it helps to not win the battle, but get to the destination. Get to the destination that you want. And if that destination means that I got to give a little bit and they've got to give a little bit, but it gets us there unbroken, then you get there unbroken. Anything else as it relates to emotional intelligence in that regard? Well, I think the fifth key, if we're talking about having the conversation, having the courage to have the conversation, and then getting to the end of the conversation unbroken, is something that LaDawn talked about a little bit earlier, in being able to really listen. Not thinking that you've heard these trigger words, so they're going to take you off on a tangent, but being able to listen to understand. Not listen to answer, not listen to defend, not listen to justify, but just listen to understand. There's a value in knowing what you don't know, because it creates a curiosity in you to want to know. But when you think you already know, then the curiosity is gone. But if you keep that curiosity and listen to understand, then it helps you, because even when the train gets off track, you've listened to understand the context, not the words per se, because you can get caught up on words and you get all off track. But if you're listening with the intent to understand, you can hear past the word to hear the context of what is being said. So I believe that's the fifth key.
Yeah, I believe that's critical. There is a difference between hearing and listening. Hearing simply means you have the ability to process that sound through your ear, and we all mostly hear in conversations. There's usually very little listening. Listening means that you are committed to giving your full, undivided attention to that person. You are present in that conversation. You are not trying to come up with a solution as soon as they say something out of their mouth. You're not trying to come up with your defense as soon as they say something out of their mouth. You are really engaged in what they are saying. That's listening. And so you have to be an effective listener in order to be able to have an effective conversation, to be able, if the conversation calls for it, to come up with a solution, or to be able to at least be a sounding board, at least be able to process what they were wanting you to hear. And a lot of times in those conversations is you processing their feelings. And if you're too busy trying to fix it or tell them why they're wrong for feeling that way, you're not feeling them. So I think it's very important for us to know how to listen. It's very difficult, because I know in the world that we live in, most conversations we have, it feels as though we are required to give an answer. It feels as though someone is attacking us, or we feel like we have to prove that we know the answer. Point blank, to be an effective listener, I could have probably not said everything that I've just said. To be an effective listener, you have to just simply remove your ego from the conversation. of knowing everything, of being everything. Put it down and just be what that person needs for you to be at that moment so that you can be fully present.
Excellent point. It all ties all together. The listening, the emotional intelligence, the having an idea about where you're going. Because again, if you're on the same page, then it helps to listen because you know you're going in the same direction. It's just when you don't know where your mate is coming from, you don't know what box they're coming out of. You feel like you've heard this before and you check out. But again, it requires, as she said, some emotional maturity. Because again, you're not trying to win the battle. You're not just trying to shut her up because you shut her up today and she's going to come back tomorrow. You shut her up tomorrow. You're trying to get to a solution. You're trying to get to where this is no longer an issue. And that requires, as she said, some emotional maturity to realize that I've got to use some emotional intelligence in this situation. And one of the ways that I can communicate that is by better listening to understand. As she said, not to defend, not to distract, not to deflect. We're going to jump right into the sixth and the final key that I believe helps to get us to have those conversations and then get to the end of those conversations unbroken is to be responsible for our words. To be responsible for the words that we choose to use in conversations. As LaDawn said, we are very precise in the words that we'll speak to our supervisors at work or our managers. We're very precise, many of us, in the words that we'll speak to our parents. We're very precise in how we go to financial institutions when we're asking for loans. But we don't employ the same responsibility for our words in conversations. And again, I get it. I fall short. I fall short, so I understand the tendency to feel like you've been pushed and now you're justified. But there isn't any justification for you being who you are. Because the world can be crumbling around you, and if this is who you have decided you're going to be, then it's who you are. So I just believe that one of the keys to getting through tough conversations is being responsible for your word choice. Don't just feel like you get to say any and everything that comes to your mind.
Yeah, I agree. And forgive me because I can't remember the author right now, but The Four Agreements is a wonderful book. And it speaks about responsibility in your communication, speaking and receiving information. And one of the things it says is that you have to be responsible for your words. Now, what I can't be responsible for is how you receive the words, because I don't know what filter you're listening to me through today. I don't know what all lives in your head. You can be with someone for 30, 40, 50 years. And I believe, again, the mate is probably one of the most intimate relationships you will have. So more than likely you will know more about that person than, most other people will. But that doesn't mean you know everything about that person, right? Because there's still a whole person outside of you. So I just never know all the time 100% what filter you're processing information through. So I can't own how you respond, but I very much have the responsibility of owning how I deliver that message to you, how I choose my words, especially if the goal is to transfer information. That's the goal of communication. You want to share something with someone. You want to give them some information. You want them to receive it, so you want to do it in the way that resonates the most with them. So I am responsible for that. So Carlos said that, that this relationship is one that you give the most of yourself to. I might have to disagree with that. I think this is the one that you see the most of a person in, because again, the level of intimacy. This is the person you go to bed with, you wake up with, you pay bills with, you raise the kids with. You see things and have conversations with this person that other people might not get to have. But that does not necessarily mean you're giving that person all that you can give that person. And that may be for a number of reasons. There may be fear, there may be trust issues, there may be whatever going on in a relationship. But irrespective of all that, you certainly have to be responsible. Carlos also alluded to the fact that, you know, if you say something to her and she's not allowed to say it today and get it out, she's going to come back tomorrow. Well, if you're lucky, she's going to come back tomorrow. If you're lucky, he's going to come back tomorrow. But what happens in most relationships, I just start trying. I just stop coming to you. I just start doing things myself. I start depending on me. I start thinking, I know we're in this together, but not. So you don't want the relationship to get to that point where communication has come to a halt, and you're only exchanging courtesies and pleasantries with one another. So again, you have to be very responsible for what you say, because you don't want it to get to that point. And this is a big one. You don't want your mate to lose respect for you, because at the end of the day, when you start saying certain things to your mate, there's no amount of apologies. Damage is done. When you start saying certain things to your mate, they start seeing you in another light. And the disconnect goes from this to a huge chasm. Yeah. And you pretend and you go through the motions, but at the end of the day, you have zero respect for that person. And when there's no respect, there's no need to give 100% of yourself. That's every reason to justify moving independently in the relationship. And then because you get to see so much of that person, because again, they spend intimate time with you, and I don't mean sex. I mean, you know, this is the person you get to see when they come home, they're tired, you know, they take off everything they present to the world, and that should be a place where they just get to be themselves. So you get to see that part of them, right? And in seeing that part and losing that level of respect, they get to bring things to you that you get to hide from the rest of the world, but you can't hide from them. And you start having those kinds of conversations, which also leads to the demise of the respect in a relationship. So it's very, very important to honor who you say you are as a person when you're having conversations. It's very important to choose your words in a way that are truly reflective of who you believe yourself to be. It's very important to choose words in a way that, just like you would choose your words in front of your mother, in front of your boss, your mate deserves that same level of respect. It's very important too, because once you get past the conversation, that doesn't necessarily mean a solution was found or anybody felt good walking away from that conversation. You all have just put it down for the time being and you moved on to the next thing. Once you get past that conversation, it's very hard to engage in any other interaction. And you don't want to be in a relationship where it starts to feel forced. Or people in the streets call it fake. You don't want to get to that point in a relationship. Because it's not impossible. It's not impossible to get back from there. But it's very difficult to live in those moments, day in and day out, because you've lost respect for your mate because they've said some things to you that just were not good things to say to anybody, let alone to the person that they supposedly care for. So yeah, I agree. Be very careful with your word choice. It's just as easy to choose the right word as it is the wrong word. It's just as easy to refrain from saying some things because you know you can do that. You don't go in church and curse. You don't go to your boss and curse. You don't go to your mom and curse. So you know how to refrain. It's like anything else. Even if you're a smoker, you don't smoke at your desk. You wait until your break. So you know how to employ restraint. So do that.
Yeah, that was pretty on point. There are things that you say that becomes very detrimental to the success of the relationship. And again, that's not to say you can't be successful, but as LaDawn said, it makes it difficult. And why make things difficult that don't have to be difficult? Relationships, two individuals coming together with their own complexities are going to be challenging enough, which is why we share what we've gone through. We share our ideas about how to be better in your relationship, how to be better in life, whether it's through our own individual coaching, whether it's through these type of videos, whether it's through other social media posts that we distribute, whether it be through conferences and seminars that we host. But wherever you find us, it's always about empowering you to be better. From Bahamas, Carlos and LaDawn said, enjoy the rest of your evening. Goodbye.